Hello and welcome to Take Two, the show that looks at the issues behind the news. I'm Ian Henshall. Today we have some news shorts you may have missed, and then we've got Roy Hunter talking to Katharine Hamnett, who, as well as being a legendary radical fashion designer, is a campaigner for direct democracy. After that we have news of the extradition treaty between America and the UK. But first, here are the news items. Research raises spectre of massive death toll from GM-linked poison. You probably haven't heard about this, perhaps because it concerns poor farmers in the third world. Thousands are dying each year through a new mystery kidney disease. There's no denying this, but equally scientists are baffled by the causes. It does not have a sexy name like AIDS or MRSA. It's simply called Fatal Chronic Disease of Unknown Origin, or CKDU for short. Now, a new study by researchers in Sri Lanka, published in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, presents a persuasive evidence that the culprit is none other than our old friend, the herbicide Roundup. This herbicide is supplied by GM corporation Monsanto on a massive scale to farmers all over the planet to use in conjunction with their GM crops designed to resist the poison. No one is saying that Roundup, on sale under various names in garden centres across the West, is directly poisoning the farmers. Instead, it seems that, as environmentalists have long warned this might happen, it is part of a cocktail of 3 ingredients, all innocent individually, but literally deadly when they occur together. The other 2 ingredients are hard water and heavy metals, like arsenic and cadmium, either naturally present in the soil or added externally through fertilizer inputs. The afflicted areas seem to match the areas where these 3 factors are present. Clearly more research will be needed to prove this new hypothesis, but who will undertake it? Presumably not the many university departments in the West who are dependent on big business for research funding. The fact the problem is largely ignored by Western media and governments is, in any case, say campaigners, a major scandal. The Center for Public Integrity in Washington points out that in El Salvador, the mystery disease is the 2nd leading cause of death amongst men. In Nicaragua, it is killing more people than diabetes, AIDS and leukemia all combined. More insider trading in New York. Insider trading in New York is hardly a big surprise, but Bloomberg News has unearthed a whole new angle to one of capitalism's key vices. Insider trading appears to be rife by employees at the Securities and Exchange Commission, the government body dedicated to stamping out, yes, you've guessed it, insider trading. It's obvious when you think about it. So long as you don't believe all that guff about how it's only our so-called enemies who are corrupt. Who better to know that a firm's shares are going to drop sharply and very profitably if you've sold short than the people charged with investigating corruption? Bloomberg have spotted an arcane statistical paper that strongly indicates that this is what's happening. Not true, says the SEC in reply. It's just that our employees are obliged to sell their shares in the company when we investigate it. So in other words, it is true, but it's set up conveniently in the rules so the people profiting cannot even be prosecuted for it if they're caught red-handed. Critics say this is a minor example of the modus operandi of the sophisticated mafia that rules Washington and New York. Using their control over the legislature, they set up legal structures which just happen to spew out loads of money, which just happens to land in their bank accounts. Perhaps the most egregious recent cases of this have been the invasion of Iraq, which just happened to multiply Bush regime bosses' already bulging bank accounts, and some would say, on an even more massive scale, the money printing scam known as quantitative easing. Normally the media collude in covering up this sort of thing. They get massive advertising revenue from the corporate crooks and their bought and paid for politicians. So let's hope the guys at Bloomberg do not have any embarrassing secrets that the NSA might have picked up on their illegal surveillance programs. Now's the time they're going to be using it. You may recall that crusading New York Governor Eliot Spitzer lasted only a few months in the job. His private use of prostitutes was emblazoned all over the media. Watch this space. Now for some positive news. You might not have heard of jury nullification, but campaigners say it's something we should all know about. The precedent was set by early Quaker William Penn. Arrested in Britain in 1670 for preaching, Penn admitted the charge, but 4 out of the 12 jurors voted to ignore the unjust law and acquit him. The judge sent the 4 to jail, but they were released on appeal, and ever since it has been a principle of law in the UK and the US that juries have the right to judge the law. This happened recently in the UK. Activists admitted that they sabotaged US warplanes that were being used in the illegal invasion of Iraq. But the jury agreed they were upholding international law, and the activists walked free. Judges very rarely tell juries that they have this right. They commonly say that they are the judge of the law and the jury is the judge of the facts. If the judge were to make this statement on oath, he or she would be committing perjury because it is not the whole truth. Oddly, the US judge who during the Second World War set the precedent used later by the Bush regime to justify Guantanamo Bay was a fierce supporter of jury nullification. This is what US Chief Justice Harlan F. Stone is quoted as saying: "If a juror feels that the statute involved in any criminal offence is unfair or that it infringes upon the defendant's natural, God-given, unalienable constitutional rights, then that juror must vote not guilty. The law itself is on trial quite as much as the case which is to be decided." And now we're going to move to Roy Hunter's interview with Katharine Hamnett.
Hi Katharine, very pleased to see you again. We had you on a couple of weeks ago talking about Fukushima, which we were extremely passionate about, and I believe you're equally passionate about direct democracy, which is what you're going to be talking about tonight.
Yes, I am. Like pretty well everybody in this country, I think it's time for political reform. Yeah. It's odd because the word revolution is in the air more than I've ever heard it in my lifetime, which is healthy, but revolutions can be frightening and ultimately fail. What I think we need is a devolution from our parliamentary
or an evolution.
Democracy, an evolution,
yes,
to direct democracy where we have referendums on everything. Citizens can launch referendums given a certain number of signatories, probably copying the Swiss model. Referendums will be held and the government is run according to the results of those referendums. It's easy to do now. Yeah. It can be done electronically, it can be done by email, there's voting apps you can have on your mobile phone. People talk about offline portion of the population, well, they could vote at voting centres, you know, as usual, or they could do postal votes. I mean, the one thing, if you say to a politician, you know, we need direct democracy, they say, what about capital punishment? You know, if you had a referendum on this, they bring it back. Okay, capital punishment, we leave it where it is. No capital punishment, but referendums on everything else.
Sure. Because
we're being run by a bunch of idiots or criminals or a combination of both.
Yeah.
And enough's enough. If the country is in such an appalling state, unless we do something about it, we have no natural resources. It's over. It's over for England unless we reform our political system. And direct democracy, I think, is the best possible way forward.
One thing that does strike me there is going back to the 2004 American election, and it seems that the votes there, the electronic voting machines were compromised. They were rigged,
weren't they?
They were rigged.
I had friends who said it's amazing because they voted Democrat and it flashed up Republican.
Really, right.
And they said, well, you know, it flashed up, so they gave them another vote, but in actual fact they should have given them 2 more votes.
Right.
One to cancel out the wrong vote and then another one for the right vote. So even when people were spotting it, it was still compromised. Yeah, I think it needs firewalling. It would need massively sophisticated firewalls.
Yeah.
And, you know, of course you're right. I mean, Bitcoin just had, you know, despite the fact they've got this massive building and it's well all to bits, you know, they got hacked into. But there's got to be a way that we can find counter checks, because if you just take education, we say Trident, you know, 100 billion on Trident is, if we had that 100 billion, we could save the NHS, or we could have free education and a grant system. Only rich people's children can, or fools can afford to go to college now.
I mean, this is the problem we're going to have, isn't it? Because at the moment the country is run by the rich people, and they've got their power and they're not going to want to let go of it, are they? But,
well, unfortunately, a lot of people are going to have to let go of it, because...
well, not a lot of people, a few people are going to have to let go of it, because there is only a few of them.
There's, you know, there's different ways that you can do it, but MPs are going to be, you know, say, for instance, you fielded a direct democracy party candidate for a constituency and they got in, they would no longer have the power of an MP who's, you know, says, oh, I'll vote for this or I'll vote for that according to what I feel like. Their role would be an IT administrator, and they would have to, in Parliament, their vote would be the results of local referenda on local and national issues.
So they are just directly representing their constituency.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately you think, well, you know, if we can do it electronically, what do we need MPs for? You know, at all. You know, maybe we should just have, you know, it's a blanket referendum and the countries run according to the results. I mean, that would be representative democracy at the same time, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so what it would do, it would take the power away from the MPs, but also what it's really doing, the important thing is it's taking the power away from the whip, isn't it? It's taking the power away from the party to tell the MPs how to vote.
Yeah, because the whip is actually a criminal practice, I think.
Oh, well, it's certainly,
I mean,
it's certainly very undemocratic.
It destroys democracy.
Yeah.
And it's wrong, and it's not working.
No.
You know, country's not working. It's time for change.
Yeah. So I believe the Swiss have had direct democracy for 160 so years. But I knew about that, but I hadn't realised that certain states in America had been with direct democracy. Would you like to talk about one of the systems?
Switzerland is the one which I think is the most interesting because it's the purest.
Yeah.
And they haven't had any wars since 1847, apart from an ongoing involvement in Afghanistan since 2001 or something, which you wonder how the hell that happened.
Yeah.
They've got low national debt, happier people, educated electorate, because there's the status issue to do with being informed about referendum issues.
Right.
They've got a country that functions.
So you're saying in Switzerland it's cool to be informed rather than cool to be ignorant, as it is in this country?
Yeah, it's super cool to be informed.
Really.
You know,
that's what we need, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be a bit of a pariah. So you've actually got people educating themselves to the point that they're better informed on issues than, you know, many legislators. Ultimately, it would take power away from politicians. I mean, Switzerland has got a parliament, still has a parliament, as well as referenda on whatever issues people can get enough signatures. I mean, I think it's about 1% of the population. It's about 50,000. Right. If they want to propose a constitutional amendment, they have to get 100,000, which is about 2%.
Right.
If they want to change a law, it's 1%.
Right.
And they've got a reasonable period, a year, 18 months, to get those signatories. Interestingly, there's very little lobbying in Switzerland, because although they have they still have a parliament. Because when I first looked at this, I thought, right, get rid of everything. We'll have a leaderless society, be marvellous. Yeah. They still have a parliament, but the parliament is very wary of overstepping itself, because it knows that it has an electorate on its back, like a shot, because they've also got the power of recall, which is magnificent. I mean, can you imagine
that is a big stick, isn't it?
Oh, I know. I mean, I'd love to know how many of the North Shropshire electorate would like to recall Owen Paterson at this very moment in time. I want to put this out as an idea, because I think that if we're going to have government by the people, it's something that we all should be discussing. This is why I'm sitting talking about it with you, because I'm just going to put it out on the waves. Yeah. But would you vote for it?
I think I would, yes.
So would you guys vote for it? You know, would you vote for it? People are watching, would you vote for it? And why haven't we done it before? Because of course it takes power away from big business, doesn't it?
Yeah,
It
of course.
crushes vested interest.
Well, they've spent a long time trying to crush our, trying to move our democracy to one side without us noticing. And
well, I mean, it's gone, really. I mean, we don't have it, and I think that we need to devolve to direct democracy before they take it away from us completely.
You say that there's no lobbyists in Parliament. So
there's very little lobbying.
Very little lobbying. Yeah.
Because it's probably a waste of time.
But what they would do, what the establishment would do is they would then have to lobby the people, wouldn't they? And so therefore, press control would get even worse than it is now. So really, with direct democracy, one of the first things you would have to do is make sure you had a free press.
I mean, there's a decrease in people get their information from newspapers now. I mean, certainly amongst the younger generation, they're getting it off the internet.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
You know, I mean, newspaper sales going down, down.
Sure.
Because people are losing.
But there's still the BBC and Sky News, and there's still a lot of people getting their news from Sky News. And there's an awful lot of people I notice in London who get their news from the Metro and the London Evening Standard because they're free newspapers, and that's why they're free, of course. There's an old saying which says if you're not paying, then you're not the consumer, you're the product. And I believe that's true of
I love that.
Yeah, it's a very good quote.
I'm going to use that.
So I believe that's why the.
But the Swiss are the biggest they're the biggest readers of newspapers, and they do it by subscription of almost any country in the world.
Oh, that's what we need, isn't it? We need a change of values, really. It's our values.
I think so.
It's our value system that's holding us down at the minute. And,
well, our value system. Do you think, or the information that we're being fed?
Well, it's a value system that's imposed on us.
I mean, I think everybody wants the same thing.
Sure.
You know, they want health, they want education.
Yeah.
You know, they want the pensions that they were promised.
But what I mean by the values is that thing of Switzerland being an informed society, because there's kudos in it, whereas we don't have that in this country, really. So, if the direct democracy will bring that kudos, where intelligence becomes cool again, I think that's a very important step.
Even if you don't think you're intelligent, at least you can be informed.
Indeed, yeah. Well, thank you very much, Catherine. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Roy. But the Swiss are the biggest they're the biggest readers of newspapers, and they do it by subscription.
The direct democracy will bring that kudos, where intelligence becomes cool again. I think that's a very important step.
Even if you don't think you're intelligent, at least you can be informed.
Indeed, yeah. Well, thank you very much, Catherine. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Roy.
British grandparents fight US extradition treaty. There's a growing list of UK citizens that have fallen victim to what campaigners dub the one-sided and grossly unfair US-UK extradition treaty, which came into force by an Act of Parliament in 2003. The Act allows the USA to extradite to Britain for breaking any US law, even if the alleged offence was carried out in Britain. Our correspondent, Fran Anderson, has looked into another case that's been in the news lately. So, Fran, what did you find?
Yes, Roy, there's another example of how unjust the US-UK extradition treaty is. This time, grandparents, Paul and Sandra Dunham, threatened with extradition on alleged expensive fraud, which they deny. They faced remand in separate US jails with a lengthy wait for a trial. The couple had lived in the US for many years, whilst Mr. Dunham was president of a company that manufactured soldering irons. He and his wife are now bankrupt and suffering from severe anxiety and depression after fighting their case for over 2 years.
Really? Well, is the UK government doing anything about this?
Shamefully, not much at all, Roy. The Dunhams hoped Home Secretary Theresa May would block the extradition on the grounds it would infringe their right to a family life under Article 8 of the Human Rights Act. But Miss May claimed she was powerless to intervene, despite what she'd said in October 2012. That was a time of public pressure resulting from the McKinnon case, when she said she'd consider pressing for a change in the law to make court hearings decide whether someone should stand trial in the UK or abroad. Mr. Dunham said, if the Home Secretary doesn't have the power to intervene to protect a British citizen, who does?
So their court case, what happened? When was it, and what happened there?
On February the 6th, 2014, the High Court heard their appeal against extradition has failed.
Oh, really?
Their solicitor, Ben Watson, said there isn't a prospect of bail, and the facility that they are likely to be remanded to has inadequate medical facilities to care for Mr. Dunham's mental health. There were hopes that extradition would be stopped under Article 8 of the Human Rights Act, Supporters include their MP, campaign groups Liberty and Friends Extradited. At present, defendants wait months or years before a trial, whilst the US prosecutors use delay tactics to pressurise desperate defendants to plea bargain, which is totally unfair.
So what could be done to make these things fairer?
Well, Roy, campaigners call for amendments to the US-UK extradition treaty, such as proper judicial scrutiny of prosecution's arguments and for prima facie evidence before extradition is granted. Safeguards to prevent injustice under both the European arrest warrant and the US-UK treaty. The threat of extradition on defendants, their friends and families is so severe that extradition should be the last, not the first resort. UK judges should hear and decide the case for and against extradition in court, instead of extradition decisions taken behind closed doors and at the mercy of the Home Secretary. Bail should be given to defendants remanded in custody. Extradition shouldn't happen until close to the trial date. Video links could be used in the pre-trial hearings so that the US prosecutors could hear them.
So does this apply to the US as well, or it seems to be very one-sided? Can you explain that?
Yes, Roy. Some think it's fair, such as a legal committee appointed by the Home Secretary in October 2011. The Baker Review, headed by a former appeals judge, Sir Scott Baker, said that the treaty does not operate in an unbalanced manner. However, critics point out that, unlike a UK defendant, an American wanted by the UK is allowed to have a proper court hearing. Any British citizen can be extradited to the US without their government even providing prima facie evidence. And whilst UK taxpayers' money pays barristers to represent the US against the Dunhams, who requested the same level of help, couldn't obtain legal aid and bizarrely were told they didn't need the services of a barrister to defend their case. This makes a mockery of justice. UK citizens can't appeal on the evidence, but only on human rights law, and the UK condemned government, some campaigners accuse, are acting like a slave to the US. As with many other erosions of our civil liberties, the unfair extradition is the result of the post-9/11 era that we are facing across the world.
Well, it seems very strange that Britain should allow this to happen to their own subjects. So what happened about innocent until proven guilty? So what do the UK population think about this?
Well, yes, Roy, according to a ComRes poll of September 2010, 83% of British MPs agreed changes should be made to the extradition laws, and 66% agreed that extradition should occur only if the requesting country first provides evidence in a UK court. In the UK, 149,000 people signed the petition against extradition. In many cases, for instance, Richard O'Dwyer. Even pro-American Conservative MP Dominique Raab agrees the UK extradition treaty is unfair. There are similar criticisms of the European arrest warrant, EAW, which fast-tracks extradition of an accused from one EU country to another with little safeguards against abuse of human rights, which I'll report on in a future episode.
Well, that seems very sad to hear, Fran. There seems to be a lot of criticisms about this extradition treaty, and no doubt we'll report on it in later episodes. Thank you very much.
Well, that interview brings us to the end of this episode of Take Two. Take Two is made by RADTV UK for The People's Voice. Thank you to The People's Voice for screening us. You can see these shows again on the RADTV UK YouTube channel, and see you next time.
you.